Call to order the Maplewood Economic Development Authority special meeting on this Monday, October 14th, coming to you live from the Maplewood City Hall. I'd like to start with a roll call. Ms. Sint?
Commissioner Juneman. Here. Commissioner Knudsen. Commissioner Abrams.
Here.
Commissioner Nevlet.
Oh, here.
And Chair Smith.
I'm here. Thank you. First up is an approval of the agenda for today.
Has there been a call?
Yes.
Oh, he's, okay.
So point of order here. We actually are going to administer oaths to you. We'll be doing it in unison as you are now taking on the role of Commissioner of the newly established Maplewood Economic Development Authority.
Got it.
Very well.
So
Proceed.
you can all stand and raise your right hand. Oops.
Yes, so if I can have you all stand, raise your right hand, and we're going to do this in unison, so when it comes time to fill in your name, please fill in your own name.
Brian Smith.
It's your own name. She said say
Okay.
your
Own name.
Your own name.
I, fill in your name,
I,
Brian
Sylvia
Smith.
Neblett,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution
that I will support the Constitution
of the United States
of the United States
and of the state of Minnesota,
and of the state of Minnesota,
and faithfully discharge the duties
and faithfully discharge the duties
of Commissioner
of Commissioner
of the Maplewood Economic Development Authority
of the Maplewood Economic Development Authority
in the city of Maplewood,
in the city of Maplewood,
in the county of Ramsey,
in the county of Ramsey,
and the state of Minnesota,
and the state of Minnesota,
to the best of my judgment and ability,
to the best of my judgment and ability.
so help me God.
So help me God.
Thank you.
Oh. Should do that every once in a while.
That's kind of fun.
Good reminder.
I feel very oathy. Yeah.
Pass it on.
Great. Well, congratulations, my fellow commissioners.
Thank you.
Shall we move on to approve the agenda? Do I hear a motion?
So moved. So moved.
Second?
Moved by Neblett, seconded by Abrams. All in favor of the agenda signify by saying aye.
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 Hearing ayes all, the agenda is approved. Moving on to the approval of the minutes. Our last meeting was on September 10th, 2018. Ms. Sint, I assume that new council member, new commissioners should abstain? Okay. And do you know if the three of us that remain were all in attendance? Okay, thank you.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda of the September 10th.
Minutes.
Oh, minutes, I'm sorry. The minutes, thank you. The minutes of the September 10th, 2018 Maplewood Area Economic Development Authority.
Moved by Abrams, seconded by Juneman. We have a motion to approve the minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
Hearing ayes all, the minutes are approved.
No ayes all.
I'm sorry, hearing ayes from 3 and 2 abstentions. Thank you. The minutes are still approved. With no hearings or unfinished business, we'll move on to new business. So, Commissioners, this will be a largely structural meeting of this group today. Mayor Abrams and I have been discussing sort of the role of this group and trying to make it a bit more active. So I think in contrast maybe to how the EDA has been before, we are hoping to have a little bit more proactivity around trying to drive some strategies for development within the city. So likely to be a bit more active. So move on to election of officers. Do we have a set process for this, Mr. Beatty?
Mr. Chair, no, it's pretty straightforward, as you see. I think the significance of this, in line with what you just said, is a recognition that the EDA is a separate legal entity, and so it should elect its own officers and make its own appointments. And that's really what we're talking about here, a lot of housekeeping issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, great. Well, let's move on first to the election of the president of the authority. Do I hear any nominations?
I nominate William Knudsen as president. Second.
Do you accept?
Oh, yeah, yes. Yeah.
Very well.
Oh, but one at a time? We're voting for each as we go?
Each roll as we go.
Okay.
Any other nominations?
Don't all scream at once.
Very well. Seeing no other nominations, all those in favor of Commissioner Knudsen becoming president signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Hearing ayes all, Mr. Knudsen is elected, so congratulations.
I nominate,
Do we now change?
or do we vote?
Do I give up the gavel now? Yeah, very well.
Did we vote?
Yeah, yeah.
I further nominate Brian Smith as vice president.
Second?
Okay, I had a motion and a second. Any discussion? Any other nominations? Any other nominations? Any other nominations? All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? You gotta-
Brian might be opposed.
No, thank you.
so, we need a nomination for treasurer.
I have a question. That's supposed to be.
Councilman
It says in our notes that it could be a staff member for one of these positions rather than us. So I'm,
No,
point of order.
no, we had made the decision that all 5 members would be.
Oh, okay.
Would
I
be
didn't-
council members.
No.
Some cities do it differently, but.
Okay, I've done my nominating. Somebody else take a turn.
I'll nominate Commissioner Neblett for treasurer.
Second?
Waiting to see what her reaction was before I said second.
Nomination for
She
Councilman
didn't
Neblett
dive under the, she didn't dive under the Diaz, so.
There was muttering.
as treasurer. Do we have any other nominations? Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carried.
Sylvia didn't vote no anyway.
Do we need a nomination for secretary?
I nominate Mayor Abrams as secretary.
Second?
Any other nominations? All those in favor, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Congratulations.
Thank you.
We'll nominate Commissioner Juniman for assistant treasurer.
You still my heart.
Second,
Is there a second?
yes, second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any other nominations?
Happens to the treasurer.
Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carried. We have our slate of officers. Okay. Now we need,
Thank you, Chair, members of the EDA. I'm wondering if it might be helpful if Mr. Beatty just took us through each of the steps, and then you can do motions where needed, and he'll note when when they're not needed. Would that be helpful?
very helpful.
Andy idea.
All right, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, the next item is really informational only. Because this is the organizational meeting, I wanted to list the documents that are sort of the official founding documents. That's what you see on the agenda. There's no action required on any of those items. The next item are appointments of staff people. We've listed the executive director, an assistant executive director. You're authorized to appoint an attorney, any other staff that you wish. Again, those are your selection, but it's common for the executive director to be the chief administrative officer of the city, which would be the city manager. An assistant executive director is a position that's not always created, but that might be somebody who would do some of the work in association with the executive director, and an attorney would be whomever you wish to appoint to serve as chief legal advisor for the EDA.
Mr. Chair, a question?
Councilman Juniman?
Thank you. Do we do these one motion at a time also, or?
I think that makes sense.
Okay. I move to appoint Melinda Coleman, city manager, as executive director of the EDA. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
I move to appoint Jeff Thompson as assistant executive director of the EDA.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carried.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. Do we,
Councilman Juniman?
if it's, can we specify an attorney, or do we keep it with firm of Kennedy and Graven?
I think,
My suggestion is if you're going to appoint Kennedy, I would appoint the firm rather than an individual.
Okay, thank you.
agreed.
I move to appoint the law firm of Kennedy and Graven as the chief legal advisor for the Maplewood EDA.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Mr. Chair, the next item on the agenda is a consideration of the bylaws. I included a draft copy of those in your packet. Certainly, if you're ready to adopt those tonight, that would be fine. If not, we can have a discussion and make whatever changes you might think are appropriate. I think it's a good idea to get those in place sooner rather than later. They're a little bit long because they include a lot of statutory provisions which admittedly repeat the statute, but I think for quick reference, both for members of the public and members of the commission, probably having some of those things in bylaws is an easier reference point than referring to the statute, trying to look it up. So that's why some of that overlap. There are some things, though, in here that are not covered in the statute. One of them, for example, is how do you call a special meeting? There's nothing in the statute that says that, and so what this draft does is use the example of the city, where statutorily cities are allowed to call special meetings by either the mayor or any two council members. So I've simply parroted that language and said that the president or any two council members can call for a special meeting. That comes in very handy at some point. One of the other provisions, there's nothing in the statute about the rules under which the board, the group will operate. I've provided some sort of general language. I've specifically not cited Roberts or other things that are commonly cited because, frankly, I don't think they work well for small groups. And so I've used general language that says, be polite, be inclusive, get your business done efficiently, and and as is usually the case, the president can make the call on procedural matters subject to challenge by any of the board members. Again, similarly with the analogy is with the city, the mayor as the presiding officer at a city council meeting can make the first call on procedural matters, but can be challenged and overturned if necessary by the board. So again, that kind of language is in there.
So we need a motion to adopt the bylaws as reviewed.
I move to adopt the bylaws for the Maplewood Economic Development Authority as written.
Second?
Discussion. I just have a question for Commissioner Smith. When you led off the meeting you suggested that there be something new and different about this process or this organization. Do these bylaws, are they things that we can work with?
Yes, Chair, I think the bylaws are pretty straightforward and offer us tremendous latitude to do what we need to do. So, but I think that's a good question.
With that, then, all those
Chair,
in favor?
I have a
Oh,
question.
Councilman Nablet.
Just it's a small thing, but it's a big thing to me. Mr. Beatty, in section 3.3 of Article 3, as well in section 312C, in case of the resignation or death of the president, is that necessary? I mean, do you know what I mean? I mean, there's a lot between resignation that could happen and death.
Have you seen my weekends?
It just seems.
Would
it
you
just
prefer
hit me funny.
disappearance?
Permanent absence?
I don't think that it's prophetic.
Okay, and I just thought, well, has this happened before? Is that why it's written like that, or?
Fair-
It just seemed extreme.
You know,
That's
fair-
all.
Fair question. Frankly,
Happened to Mr. Knudsen, and I do not want to become a suspect for
Right.
that reason. So.
I had, I've never had that question. I had, that was not part of my thought process. If people want to change the language, that's fine, but I mean, I don't think there's any real significance to it. I mean, if the president is no longer there for whatever reason, then the vice president, as you would expect,
Right.
takes over.
Right.
So,
I don't mean to be like just throwing things around here, but I do know some cities, a city in particular, where they didn't have a death, but they had someone who had a severe or a
incapacitated?
Yeah, incapacitated, thank you, and could not serve. So I don't know if it talks about if you miss meetings or you can't come to meet, there's nothing like that in here. And frankly, I don't know how often we're going to meet. We're going to talk about that later on in the
Yes.
agenda. But there are situations that come up that are unanticipated and,
So
Well,
do we need another term then?
yeah.
no,
that-
I don't know, but
Well,
I mean,
I
I'm
think
just
that's-
throwing that out there
But
because that
later it
happens
says
too.
incapacitated.
It does?
Right, in C. It
Oh, it
goes
C it
on
does,
for-
okay.
Yeah,
I didn't remember that.
or
Okay,
death, incapacitated.
there you go. All right.
Yes, you-
Excused absence. I'm sorry. This is such a different process. I apologize.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah, we're all new at this.
Another question you had, Council, on 312, is it?
That's the one she's talking about.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
that's what I was talking about.
Extenuating circumstances.
Yep, okay. I see that now, the capacity, yep. Thank you.
Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Oh, dear.
For John, if you choose.
The next item, Mr. President, has to do with approval of the 2020 budget recommendation to the city council. The finance director may want to speak to this specifically, but basically, one of the things that you're going to be doing on an annual basis is providing a budget to the city council. Hopefully, it will be earlier in the year than it's happening now. I say in the bylaws, it needs to be done by August 1st. The idea is that if the EDA is going to be asking the city for money, the city needs to know that early enough to include it in its budget, which is where the August 1st deadline comes in. So the city can fold that into its budget and include that if it wishes for adoption of the preliminary budget in September. So hopefully we'll be doing that earlier in previous years. You've already seen this, but this was an opportunity to sort of formalize it. The request is the money that you would, the EDA would like the council to provide over and above any other monies that are coming to the EDA. In other words, the EDA is going to have a lot of money from tax increment and other sources. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is money that the city is levying. And at some point in the future, if the EDA wishes to levy, use what's called an HRA levy, which is something different, we'll be talking about that at some future point. But this is really just to formalize, I think it's a $120,000 request that the EDA has made of the city council.
And I'll make a motion to approve the request for $120,000 in tax levy funding from the city council.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Mr. Beatty, go ahead.
Well, the next item is staff reports. I think the executive director and the assistant executive director have some reports that they would like to make to the board.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, members of the Economic Development Authority. I just wanted to make you aware of a meeting in which Councilmember Smith and Mayor Abrams and myself and Mark Jenkins from HEDC, the Housing Economic Development Commission, we met to discuss, I think Councilmember Smith kind of set this up a little bit, to talk about how we do some strategic planning with the council and the HEDC group to look at some prioritization of our staff time and resources. And so we're going to be scheduling that soon. But most importantly, we have scheduled a development tour of 3 different communities that have done a lot of redevelopment. And we've scheduled that for Saturday, November 16th. The time to be determined, but we are going to visit the cities of Richfield, St. Louis Park, and Robbinsdale. And so I think that will be really enlightening. We have done this in the past with the planning commissioners and design review board to look at development projects, and I think it will give us an idea of the scope and scale of projects that cities are doing.
Good choices.
And give us some ideas of, what we can do too. And they're all cities that are very similar to us. St. Louis Park is a little bit different, but that's the dream big part when you go to St. Louis Park. But there's nothing wrong with dreaming big either. So that's gonna be scheduled. We hope you can all put that on your calendars and attend. I think that'll be a good 4 or 5 hours of time well spent. So that's really all I had to report. Mr. Thompson can update you on some of our projects and let you know. I'm not sure all of them will fit into the EDA necessarily, but it's a good opportunity for us just to communicate some of the things that we're working on.
Thank you, Mr. President and EDA. So just in terms of kind of project updates, they largely align to a lot of the visioning and small area plans that the city has been working on in the past years and certainly recently adopted with the North End. Can think of 3 that are probably of kind of the most importance. One is we continue to work on the city's London Lane property, the former fire station down in South Maplewood. Just working on marketing that to potential developers. We do have development interest in that site from several developers right now. So we're continuing to have conversations with them and hope to bring to the council, hopefully soon, some potential offers on that site. In other development, we continue to work with the owners of Birch Run. That's the shopping center just west of Maplewood Mall. As they've expressed interest in redevelopment of that site and have told the city that they are not developers themselves. They're an asset manager, so they own shopping centers, and so they could be potentially looking for development partners here in the Twin Cities area to assist in, which is their interest in redeveloping that site in something that could be consistent with our North End Vision Plan. More immediate, we do expect very soon a tax increment application from Sherman Associates for the Frost English Phase 3 project. That's going through the entitlement phase with their zoning and land use applications right now. But we expect to have their TIF application for their redevelopment district as well as that city loan that the council approved the term sheet for. So that's moving ahead. The project will be before the council in probably the next month, and then we likely will have that tax increment and city loan agreement shortly thereafter. So those are the three highlights. There's certainly other projects in town in terms of reinvestment in some of our commercial centers and some of our other areas in Gladstone that we're working on, but those are the three highlights that come to mind.
Thank you. So we need a motion to set the next EDA meeting?
I'll move to set the next EDA meeting for Saturday, November 16th, 2019, for our bus tour.
Second.
But we need to have a time.
Oh,
Do we have a,
at 8:30 in the morning.
or as soon thereafter as people gather? So that, well, it gives you a little bit of flexibility. You couldn't start before that, but you can start after that.
Okay, 8:30 then. Or as soon as people may gather.
After 8:30. Everybody got that? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
The next part of that, Mr. President, is I think it would be beneficial for the board to establish a regular meeting schedule. And I'm not sure what to suggest because it strikes me that monthly is probably too frequent. I don't know whether quarterly makes more sense. But I think, and that might be something that you want to experiment with and obviously can change, but the idea, it would be to do what the city council does, which is each year adopt a regular meeting schedule and adopt it by resolution so that all those meetings are laid out, so you don't have to worry about calling additional meetings. If it turns out that the interval that you've established, let's say it's quarterly, doesn't work, it's too far, then we put that provision in the bylaws that you've just adopted about calling special meetings. But I don't think it's a good idea to rely on always calling special meetings. So if there are any thoughts tonight about what kind of schedule, that would be fine. Otherwise, this is really an item to alert you to the need or the desirability, I think, of establishing that and hopefully coming up with a schedule. I would recommend that you establish at least one additional regular meeting. I know you've established this one for the 16th, but that's going to be this mobile tour. So I think it would at least be good to establish another meeting such as this, another business meeting.
Mr. President?
Discussion? Councilman Junwan?
Thank you. Could
Commissioner?
we word it such as quarterly or sooner if needed, and then call special meeting? I mean, would that be sufficient?
Discussion, Councilman Smith?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, we can always call a special meeting. I think quarterly is probably appropriate for a standing meeting. We can always cancel those meetings if we don't have agenda items as well. So,
For me, could you vision an agenda? What kind of things would we do?
so it may be that, I know the mayor and I have talked about, if the authority decided to focus on housing, right? It might be about creating a microloan program, or it might be about creating a rehab program or a developer event or incentive program, or all those kinds of things that can help enhance housing, if that were the direction we wanted to go. It could be around any sort of that sort of programming that the EDA might fund.
Well, I know the discussion we had about tax increment financing was very important to me. I always thought it was kind of a give-me. But when you look at the rigor and how you earn that opportunity and what it means to the city, I was impressed with what I learned.
Yeah, and
And
ultimately,
I think
it's
there's so much of that especially if we're looking at redevelopment. I love the idea of this tour, because when I did some work with a school district in Roseville years ago, I picked those first-ring suburbs as a cohort to look at, to look at as a comparative group. So I think it's just a great idea. I like the idea of this, and I would certainly reasonably spend more time at it. So quarterly, do we want to meet in another night, or do we want to, take
think-
any time to our regular council meetings, or any thoughts?
That's really your call, but we might suggest trying to meet at this time slot, because then we know we're going to get you here.
Yeah.
We try to add another date, it
I-
gets
I-
problematic scheduling.
I couldn't
So I
agree
think we
more.
can work around that. It might make for longer meetings. We might have some things that we'd normally put on a workshop that we would handle differently. But I think that would be my suggestion for making sure we're all here.
Looks like it's,
A lot of head nodding.
yeah, yeah.
Mr. President, I think that's a very good idea, and, I think the regularity of your meeting schedule is going to depend on how much business comes before you, and that's going to be kind of something you're going to have to discover. I represent the Robbinsdale EDA. They meet on a monthly basis,
Wow.
but they have they have something to do that often. You may come to have that much work, but my sense is, at least initially, probably not, but it's, you can adopt a meeting schedule that calls for quarterly meetings and decide that that's too much or not enough and make an adjustment.
Did they ever figure out what to do with the Terrace Theater?
It got torn down, believe me.
Oh, it did?
was- Yes. That's-
I graduated.
Yes, it is.
from
It's
Robbinsdale.
one of the projects, that was 3 years ago, that was a very controversial
I know.
project. One of the projects that you'll probably see is the Hy-Vee, as Melinda says, that's on that site. And the multifamily housing that's going up across the street from it.
So do we need a motion for that,
Yeah, and so
for regular meetings, quarterly meetings? Is that,
We direct
you want to?
Can I make a motion to direct our executive director to find appropriate meetings on a quarterly basis going forward and communicate back, or do we need to set the actual dates now?
My recommendation would be that you set a specific date and time for the next business meeting. So that's been established. And maybe at that point, we will have some thoughts as to quarterly and whatever. Maybe we have thoughts now.
Executive Director?
President. I think that we would probably want to have an EDA meeting on the December, whatever the first meeting in December meeting is, a date, because we have a budget to
16th.
adopt.
Hmm.
And then after that, maybe February, second meeting in February.
That would
So
be
Chair,
fine.
I would move that we schedule our next meeting on Monday, December 9th at 6 PM here at the Chamber.
Second.
We want to add in the quarterly.
Mayor.
Thank you. No, Commissioner, I'm a commissioner right
Commissioner,
now.
that's right.
I think my suggestion would be if we go with December, what did you say?
9th.
9th at 6 PM. When we get into the next year, we can adopt the quarterly dates
Right.
when we adopt everything in January in terms of assignments and, when everything is going to meet, and then we'll have all of that, but at least we've got one. That would be my suggestion.
Do it as part of our appointment process in
right.
January? Okay,
That makes sense.
Good idea.
I like that.
So, is that an amendment to Mr. Council, or Commissioner Smith?
No
I thought so.
amendment, just a suggestion.
motion.
The amendment-
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. So, okay. Are we done?
Mr. President, the next item is called Agenda Items for Next Meeting. It was really sort of an open invitation or opportunity for any of you who have specific items you'd like to see on that next agenda or an upcoming agenda. I will tell you one of them that that we should do fairly soon, and we've hinted at this prior to this. At the current time, the city is the tax increment authority for all your projects. My suggestion is going to be that the EDA become the authority for the tax increment projects. After all, that's why you're in this business, I think. That is a two-step process. It's going to require the city council making that decision, basically to give up those projects and to transfer them to the EDA. And then the EDA at a subsequent meeting will have to accept those projects. I suspect, I haven't talked to staff in detail about this, I suspect all of them will be transferred, but, because I'm not sure why we wouldn't do that, but
Yeah.
you'll end up being the tax increment authority. and then we'll be fully in control of those projects. So that's one, just a hint of one item that's coming. If anybody else has any other things to add, then this is the time to speak up.
Whose light is on? Commissioner Smith? Is it?
Thank you, Chair. So the other thing that we had discussed when talking about the bus tour was sort of and not to fill everybody's calendars up here, but was some sort of a follow-up meeting with Head C to sort of a smaller version of our council retreats where we get together to talk about strategically what do we want the EDA to do in the long run. Is it about housing? Is it about commercial development? If it is about housing, is it about new or existing? You know, all those big questions, once we've sort of seen that. So I'm wondering if that's, first of all, if others feel that that might be a good idea. I would envision that as a more informal workshop-style meeting rather than here in the chamber, you know, certainly open to the public, but you know, along with our friends on the Head C. So wondering kind of what your thoughts are on that and if that's something we want to try to schedule. Or if we want to check in with
I think
Jenkins
it's a
and
good
see.
idea. I think the workshops and the opportunity we've had to learn quickly, you know, in becoming new council members, and from my point of view, has been extremely helpful. Executive Director Coleman.
Thank you, President. I'm kind of thinking out loud here, but I had one thought that occurred to me is that maybe we want to kind of jump on the momentum from the tour. And one way we could do that is possibly adding it in the time frame of our workshops, but make them the joint meeting with Head C to do some strategic planning. It might take a couple meetings, but
Yeah.
that might be easier than trying to get another Saturday in
Yeah,
December. That's just my idea, or we can wait and do a half a day somewhere or whatever.
We could also start maybe a little earlier on Monday, the 25th, it's the Monday before Thanksgiving. Maybe do like a 4 o'clock or something and
Yeah.
and then just knock it out. I don't think we need more than a couple hours, but
Yeah,
That works for me, yeah.
okay, I like that. Thank you.
so I should probably make a motion around that.
Yeah.
11:25, is that what you said?
Yeah, so I move that we call a special meeting on November 25th at 4 PM somewhere.
Yeah, we'll figure that out. Maybe Wakefield
At
if
a
it's available.
location, yeah, a location to be determined, and for a joint meeting of the EDA and Head C.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. So, let's see. So we have a special meeting on the 25th, a regularly scheduled meeting on the 9th, is that correct? Business meeting.
And November 16th.
And the 16th, we have our, now that
Lot of
tour
togetherness.
doesn't include pedals, does it? This is.
No.
Okay, anything else?
Final item is other matters, which may be. Again, sort of an open process. Maybe you've covered that with the previous item, but if there's anything else you'd like to talk about or discuss, here's the chance.
Any discussion, any commissioners? All right. We're good.
I have one.
Oh, you had, I
Thanks.
thought you were waving.
No.
Bye, yeah. Or I know, wait a minute, no, maybe that's where I'm done then. Look at the-
No, that would be the cane. Are we, as the authority, then are we going to be doing the updates from staff on like the projects that Jeff just laid out earlier? And then also like the properties that have been acquired in Gladstone and where we are with that? That will become part of this, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Wow.
So that's something we should certainly take into account because, you know, we do get questions about particularly Gladstone.
Definitely.
Good idea.
Yes, a good idea.
Thank you.
Any further business come before the commission? If not, do I get to bang the gavel? Yeah. All right, officially close the meeting of the EDA.